Good morning, everyone. This morning's parable from Matthew is quintessential Matthew. We've heard a series of what we might call judgment parables about people making the wrong choices and suffering the consequences. Sometimes the consequences are horrible, like feeling as if you're thrown into utter and outer darkness. This morning's parable includes another quality we see throughout Matthew's gospel, which is sorting sheep and goats, people who care for the naked and the imprisoned and the hungry, and people who don't. This parable is often used to instruct us to be good or else. It's easy to imagine that Christ is seated on his throne, sort of like Santa in his chair, knowing who's been naughty or nice. If you are nice, you get what you want for Christmas. If you're not, you get a lump of coal or nothing at all. If you're good to those in need, you go to heaven. If you aren't, you don't. This is what I would call a transactional approach to God and God's grace. And yet, in this transactional approach, there is no room for grace. And in the kingdom of grace, there is no room for a transactional approach to God. I think many of us can remember, and maybe it happened yesterday, a time when you approached God in this transactional way. For a long time, I had a transactional approach to giving to the church. And that was all caught up in my transactional relationship with God. When I first joined the church, and it was a big old Episcopal church in downtown Boston, I was all by myself, and I was in kind of a lonely time in my life. And this was eons before the internet. And I gave a pledge, and I did it, it was a tiny pledge, like $5 a month. And I did it so that I could check the box on the pledge card that said, please send me weekly offering envelopes. I didn't realize that those were going to be envelopes that would be given to me all at once the next week for me to make my weekly offering. I thought that somebody was going to send me an envelope in the mail every week. And I really was looking forward to mail. So when I was a little bit older, in my mid-20s maybe, I pledged because I wanted to belong. I wanted to be like everyone else. Then I pledged because I wanted people to like me. I wanted to be impressive. I wanted to impress the priest at my church. I wanted to impress the senior warden. I wanted to impress the stewardship chair. Then I started pledging because I knew the church bills needed to be paid, and I loved my church and I wanted to help. But it was still a transaction. It became a transaction between me and the church budget, a way for me to own a piece of that budget. This is not a bad thing. It became a transaction between me and the church's heating company in a way. It was like another bill. Through all of these stages, I was looking at my monthly or weekly pledge like it was a bill in the context of all my other bills. And the amount that I pledged each year was culled from whatever I had left over after paying those bills, after paying my rent, and after going out to dinner. Then something shifted. I started tithing. The traditional standard for a tithe is 10%, and I'll get back to that in a minute. What I found was the most important aspect for me about tithing was that I gave to God through my church first. It was not what was left over. And the other thing that was different and crucial was that my offering was one of gratitude. I found that my giving was, in fact, thanksgiving, an offering of joy and gratitude for what I saw God doing in me, in people I loved, and in my church. This is what I believe Jesus asks for in today's parable. Don't be kind in order to get the good stuff. Be kind because the good stuff of grace and love has already been given to you. And there is, in fact, enough in you to be spilling over to all those around you, especially those in need. I do not tell this story about my giving history because I am such a wonderful and spiritually evolved person. Believe me, I'm not. But sometimes, if we adopt a practice for its own sake, something then shifts in our experience of God and God's kingdom. If we act as if we are just so brimming over with a sense of God's presence and love and grace that we have to give love and grace to others, then we will, in fact, have that experience. So I'm going to tell you my practice. I commend it to you not because of what it could do for our church, but because it has done so much for me. As I mentioned, my gift to the church is the first check I write when I get paid, not the last. I confess that it took me a long time to give up writing a check and switch to telling my bank each month to do it for me. And this year, I've used our new web-based electronic giving to set up automatic pledging. I'll see how that goes. I might miss the practice of typing in the amount on my bank website every month. The other part of my practice is that I give 10% of my net pay. I say net because people always wonder about that. I'm planning to tithe in retirement, so I don't tithe on what I'm setting aside for retirement. So my tithe on my net comes out in 2021 to be just shy of $400 a month. For me, the amount is less significant than that it's a percentage. And if you've never given a percentage of your income, it's really a wonderful practice. I believe that it brings us closer to God, and not because of what we're giving, but because of the experience and the relationship. And you can start by looking at what you give and figuring out what percentage of your income it already is. Although I will tell you that the first time I did this, it came out to like 0.0001 or something like that. But look at what percentage it is of your net income and then think, well, okay, this year I'm going to give 1%, and next year I'm going to give 2%, and the year after that I'm going to give 3%. It just puts our giving into a different relationship. We live in a transactional world, and we think that we need to earn God's love and grace. So I would suggest thinking instead of God's love as your inheritance. Most of us don't have a bunch of family heirlooms lying around our houses. But think about something that you may have gotten from a family member that has a story to it. Recently, my mother gave me a necklace right here. It's not beautiful. I think it's supposed to be Russian amber because there's a lot of that in her jewelry box and in my grandmother's jewelry box before her, but I think it's plastic. I also think that a lot of things that pass for Russian amber is plastic. But anyway, the gift came with a story. The story was that the first time she met my grandmother, my father's mother, who was my very, very favorite, um, my grandmother put this necklace on her and said, "This is a gift from me to you. Welcome to my home." My mother kept it because she ended up marrying my father. So she gave it to me as a memento of my grandmother and of that interaction, and with the thought that someday I might give it to a young woman that my son invites over for dinner. So the point of this memento, this inheritance, is that it is not something that I would ever go out and buy from a jeweler. And it's not something that my mother would ever sell if I didn't want it or need it, or something that I would ever sell. It came from her mother-in-law to her and from her to me because of our shared story. Because that's what it means to be part of our family. I didn't earn it. I didn't have to do anything to get it. Think about something like this in your family or in your story. The things that we have from Jesus are like this. Love and grace and the love of our neighbors are handed down to us, not because of something that we did. Like family mementos that are part of our identity, we pass these things on in love and gratitude and would never sell them. My invitation to you, God's invitation, as Jesus sits at the table of the great feast on this Christ the King Sunday, is to give of yourself from a place of love, gratitude, and awareness of God's gracious invitation, God's generous proclamation of a new reign. Our guiding verse for this fall's financial commitment campaign comes from the beginning of the Song of Mary, the Magnificat. My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. This is Mary's expression of gratitude and hope. Mary, who had nothing. Mary, who did not become the mother of God because of anything she did. Mary, who understood that God's presence in the world as Jesus was going to be revolutionary, filled with transformation and hope. We're going to spend some time with the Song of Mary throughout Advent, which begins next week. This week, as you continue to pray about how you will express your gratitude and hope through a pledge to our church, think about Mary, proclaiming the greatness of the Lord and rejoicing. You might also hold in your hearts the words to today's closing hymn, one of my very favorites. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Take my moments and my days and let them flow in ceaseless praise. Take my will and make it thine, it shall be no longer mine. Take myself and I will be ever, only, all for thee.